So, and this actually is a question that I have in regards to the vaccines. Moderna announced, I guess it was, it feels like it was years ago, but I think it was yesterday, that it was 95% effective in their, at this stage in their tests. One of the things that was both sort of like helpful and disturbing about it was that they needed to get to 154, I think it was, infections out of the 30,000 people. And they had projected that not to happen until like February. But because the American infection rate is now like literally graphing, looking like a rocket, that they will get there within the next 5 or 6 days. And so they will have a sense of, between their placebo and their vaccination groups, just how effective it is, where these 150 infections lie in one or two of those groups. Pfizer announced today that as their test went on, they found it also at 95%, which is 5% higher, which means that the subsequent infections happened to people who got the placebo. Here's my question, and I think, it's hard to sort of speculate how quickly they'll be able to roll that out. That's more of a production issue on some level. And then, there's it's easier to get the Moderna, I think, vaccine to people because it doesn't require the same type of freezing that the Pfizer one does. But here's my question about both those vaccines. And this also leads to that question about asymptomatic. If you are asymptomatic, you can obviously pass it on, right? Is that the same with the vaccine? Like, can you be protected from getting it with the vaccination, but still get it enough to sort of hand it off?
Sam, that's an excellent question. That was actually one of the points I was going to bring up when we got to vaccines today, is that is a huge unknown right now. So remember, both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines were really announcements by press release. So we have not had a chance to actually read the papers or the journal articles rather. And until we do, those are one of many questions that we have to ask. I would imagine, now this is completely speculative, but I would imagine if they had that information, that would have come out with the efficacy rates that they released as well. So, but we don't know. I think that it's too hard to say right now. But under ideal situations, yes, the vaccine hopefully will be able to prevent transmission of virus to other people. And if it does do that, we will get to a post-coronavirus era sooner than later, if that's the case.
And 95% efficacy, even if it doesn't do that, let's say, is still really incredible, because part of having a vaccine, the presumption is that only a certain percentage of people are going to take it, and you will get to a certain level of adoption, if you will, that then basically gives the virus very little room to move. It can't move in as many different directions as it normally would. And so it gets inhibited and it just sort of like fizzles out. But with 95% efficacy, I mean, that's assuming like, people thought like, 60, 70% is really would be like, because our flu vaccines aren't even that high and they are relatively effective. But at 95% of efficacy, at that point, I almost, as me as an individual, let's say, like, I'm not as concerned with how many people take it. Then it's like, it's less of a herd issue and it's more of like it's less of a me issue. It's more of like a you issue if you don't take it.
Right. I mean, so you bring up a very good point. So one, I just want to be very clear. Yes, they're talking about 94.5% or 95%. And let me just explain what that number means. Essentially what that means is that if you, the person who gets the vaccine, are exposed to coronavirus after you are vaccinated, and there's time to allow your immune system to build immunity to it, that if exposed to coronavirus, there's a 95% likelihood that you're not going to get the virus. So that's what that number essentially means. And the reason why it's so effective is that, let me just kind of take you guys back to college biology for a quick second. And those vaccines are what are referred to as
some bad news for you.
Yeah, I did not take college biology.
I hit the. But please.
I was hopeful. That's right. You were probably pre-law. All right. So mRNA is part of the genetic code. These are mRNA viruses. We've never have had mRNA vaccines before. They were developing them for coronavirus. Moderna was actually in the process, or not the Moderna that we know of now. One of the entities of it was actually working on this mRNA vaccine for the common cold coronavirus. And what the mRNA does is it's a piece of genetic code that gets inserted into us. It gets into cells. And what the cells do is they start pumping out the mRNA code is coding the spike protein of the coronavirus. We've all seen the coronavirus. It has all the spikes on it, right? So that spike protein is ubiquitous amongst all of the coronaviruses. So this may actually help us, and I haven't heard anybody say this, complete speculation, but that this may actually help against the common cold coronaviruses. That's one of those things that we need to see as we go on. But the reason why it's so effective is that the body's pumping out just the spike protein. The virus isn't there at all. It's not a live attenuated virus, nothing. It's just the protein. And the immune system, antibodies are generated and latch to that spike protein. And once you start building up that immunity, if then exposed again to the real virus, your body's already been primed to actually take care of it. And so that's why there's been this high rates. And that's why, because they're using the same technology, it's amazing that you have two different companies that are having the same levels of efficacy as well. It's really remarkable. And I agree, hopefully this is something that could actually, quote unquote, and I've said this a million times, but this hopefully could be a game changer.
And maybe in the future we'll come back. Is this story, I know I've done a little reading about this mRNA, and it was sort of like a laughing stock for a while, I guess, in this industry, this area where people are like, this is mad scientist stuff and quackery on some level. And so all these things were sitting on the shelf and were pulled off because it sounds like people were just like, whatever you got, try it at this point.
Absolutely. And of course, the Moderna vaccine came from National Institutes of Health. So the fact that Dr. Fauci had, and Dr. Fauci's an infectious disease doctor. He's the premier of us all, and so when he really put his interest, when they gave money through Operation Warp Speed to Moderna to do this mRNA vaccine, it did implant kind of like a level of justification for them to continue to do that work. If hopefully these vaccines will prove to be successful, if this is the case, we are going to see a shift now toward a lot more of these mRNA vaccines because we can produce them very, very quickly. You don't have to go through all the rigmarole to produce the older type of vaccines like influenza that needs to be in egg products and this sort of stuff. It takes a long time because you need a lot of eggs because there's a lot of people, right? So if you could get away through all of those difficulties with respect to development of vaccine and use this mRNA where you inject a little bit of genetic code and then that genetic code kicks out an antigen. The antigen is the part of an organism that antibodies latch onto. And if we can do that with other vaccines, we could be in a much better position when we do get to COVID-22, because as I said the last time, yes, the things that we have that got us to COVID-19, we have not changed with respect to that may prevent COVID-22.
That is when I have quoted you many times, and I should just remind the audience that when I asked you what you were most afraid of what's going on, you said COVID 2022, and I quote that quite a bit in a lot of conversations. All right, so just quickly, based upon what you know about RNA, and of course, like we haven't seen any of the papers, all the caveats that are there. There have not been really much reported side effects, maybe some nausea, maybe a little bit of a headache. But is that consistent with what you know about that type of technology, I guess?
I'm a little out of my world, so this is completely speculative. I've heard interviews with the scientists. I've read a lot about the vaccines, and I'm reading between their lines as a physician, as an epidemiologist, as an infectious diseases doctor. I really do believe that this is going to be a safe vaccine. I really, really do. I was initially a little hesitant. I was a little off-put by the speed. And of course, the politicization of the whole thing was just like anybody else, had me somewhat hesitant. Of course, we need to read the papers. Of course, we need to see the safety data. That being said, the interviews that I'm reading with the scientists, and of course, they're putting out their best foot. They're putting out the people who are going to say all the right things or whatever. I understand all that. But when I read between their lines, I believe that this is going to be actually a positive thing. I think that if it's true that this technology of being able to inject mRNA so that cells take it up and they kick out this antigen and that it does not interfere with any other functioning, that this could potentially be, again, not only a game changer for coronavirus 2019, but any future coronaviruses or Ebola, influenza, avian flu, what have you. This could be something that would be a remarkable technology upgrade to vaccines and to preparing us for pandemics in the future.
Okay, so lastly, we are a week and a half from Thanksgiving. Today, a lot of people are going to be traveling. I think it's like, depending on what part of the country we're talking about. I mean, I can tell you in New York, at least in South Brooklyn, mask wearing, at least outside, there is a tremendously high compliance. And it even as you're walking down Flatbush, I don't see anybody for maybe a block. Just the idea that person's wearing a mask and I'm wearing a mask sort of indicates to me that like we're signaling to each other, we're taking it seriously. I know I don't need to wear a mask a block away from you. You know you don't need it from me, but it's our way of indicating this is the right thing to do. And if we go into other places and we're being careful, we're taking, I'm sitting right now in a studio with Emma, but she's on the other side of the room. I've got plastic sheeting all across here. We've got air filters over there. I've got humidifiers. I got the window open. It's a little chilly. I got my sweater vest on. If people are going to get together and in reasonable numbers of people, maybe I have one person come into my sort of pod, as it were. What are the precautions that people can take that will mitigate that risk? Obviously, mask wearing. Does my HEPA air filter do anything?
I would think so.
Doing anything? The window? What's happening?
Okay, so one, please don't do it. Like, when I got married, my wife was like, Thanksgiving is our family's. You're just gonna have to deal with it. And so when my mother-in-law called and said Thanksgiving, we were like, absolutely not. There's no way in the world. We're actually doing something just the two of us as well. I would recommend that because what we're going to see, and just kind of going backwards for a quick second, when I did say that, yes, we have known traditionally that in pandemics, especially pandemics caused by respiratory viruses, that there's always a winter peak. And what we always, and what I have always thought, and this is something I've told you in the past, I've been studying since I was 14, because epidemics were just fascinating for me, was we always thought it was the cold. People go in for the winter, they go indoors, but it wasn't necessarily something that we saw, in the Southern hemisphere, but we did see here. And then of course cases go up. But what I'm realizing now, it's not just the cold, it's pandemic fatigue. But I never realized it before because I'd never gone through a pandemic, and most epidemiologists obviously had never done it as well. I think that it is the cold that's driving people together and increasing cases and transmission that leads to that second wave, but it's also pandemic fatigue because people then are starting to let their guards down. And I'm telling you, what we're going to see in February pales in comparison to what we're going to see here, or what we're seeing now. I live in New Orleans, right? And the big discussion is Mardi Gras. No, there's no Mardi Gras. Like, that's it. Like, Mardi Gras, the idea of having Mardi Gras is what caused what happened in New Orleans in April was because of Mardi Gras. We're going to see so many cases in February because of Thanksgiving and because of Christmas, and the fact that people are fatigued, they want to be with their families, they want to do these sorts of things. So to answer your question, if it happens, and El País, which is a Spanish newspaper, did a wonderful article. It was more of a graphics, and it's called like a room, a bar, and a classroom. And when you don't look at it on your phone, look at it on your computer. And when you scroll through it, it goes through and showing these beautiful animations of how if you're in a room with no ventilation and nobody wearing masks, and you have one person who's positive, everybody's going to get positive within 4 hours. If you have some masks, you'll have maybe 4 4 out of the 5 people will have virus. If you open up the window and increase circulation, we know that that will significantly decrease that transmission. And we saw that from a study that happened in Germany, where the 2 towns in Germany put students back to school. They were maskless, which is incredible. But what they did is they increased the ventilation system in the schools significantly, such that they drove transmission to almost zero as a result of doing that. And what we've seen is that circulation of air when you're indoors is so incredibly important, probably as important as mask wearing. So if people are going to do it, they should sequester themselves for 14 days. So that means they should have done it starting a couple days ago at the time of this recording. Get tests. We know that the rapid tests for asymptomatic people don't perform well when compared to rapid tests for symptomatic people. So people should, if you're asymptomatic, you should have a PCR test. But of course, the problems with that is that it takes several days for those results to come back. But if you can do that, 14 days quarantine, a PCR test ideally, and then drive to wherever it is that you're going and then remain masked indoors with ventilation, that's probably the safest way you can do it.
MarkAlain Dery, thank you so much for your time today. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. And we will check back in with you. And this time we won't wait 6 months. I suspect February is going to be really difficult in this country. And in spring, hopefully, we'll bring some better news. But I think we're in for a real difficulty. And I have to say that, honestly, like, I have been planning these months now based upon our last conversation. And so I really appreciate the information. And and I also want to say, folks should visit maskupcoviddown.com, which I know you're involved with, and it's an attempt to get people, to educate people at a time where there's like almost an equal force to diseducate them about mask wearing. So this is a good resource for folks.
Absolutely. We're doing this 28-day challenge based on a op-ed that I wrote that went viral in June that basically said if everybody just masked for 28 days. Why 28 days? The incubation period of the virus is 14 days. 2 incubation periods is traditionally what we consider to be a elimination of a virus during a pandemic like Ebola or whatever. So 28 days of mask wearing. If the whole country just did it for 28 days, indoors, outdoors, what have you, we would see a rapid elimination of virus. So Mask Up, COVID Down is the website, and we're doing it with Masks for America, which I'm on the board with as well. We've distributed about 1 million pieces of PPE since the beginning of the pandemic. So thanks for that plug.
MarkAlain Dery, thanks so much today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Emma. Nice to see you.
Much.
All right, quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Jean Ross. She's the co-president of the Nurses National Union. We'll be right back.